أعوذ بالله العلي العظيم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. Let's see who's coming. There we are. All right, not many people. All right, we only got 3 people. Is that going to be enough? Since I'm not reading, I'm going to have enough time to talk. It's the same. Well, that's about it. 4 people. All right. It'll have to do. I hope you guys have enough questions formulated for this session. Whoever wants to go first, go first. Any issues that you have with the text or things needing clarification or expanded or whatever you want to talk about. This Jeff.
Yeah, sure, I can start.
Please.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. How are you?
So,
Yeah, so I guess this is my first thing that I noticed. So on page, there are a lot of things that I read in these few chapters, but this was something that stuck out. So on page 207, this first paragraph, it's written, so the wider context is, he's talking about the Supreme Spirit and all of its facets. I guess like facets is the best way to describe this thing. And then there's even facets within the facets, like this over here. So he says one of the ways the Supreme Spirit one of its aspects, I guess, is the heart. And he says, as for its being the heart, it is on account of its fluctuation between the side that faces God, thereby receiving lights from him, and the side that faces the animal soul, emanating that which it receives from its creator in accordance with its capacity. And I guess what really stands out for me here is this juxtaposition almost between God and creator, and how these both sort of, I guess, appear in our heart in different ways. I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit and
sure.
what exactly that means for the Wayfarer.
This is a good point because it is very subtle and implied in this kind of metaphysics that I don't know why they never gloss it as explicitly as it becomes with the Shaykhi school. One thing you got to understand about the notion of fuad is that fuad, you can translate it as heart, but it can be very misleading if you just leave it as a kind of a one-to-one translation with qalb, which is heart. Fuad is more than that. Fuad is the inner of the inner. In the Quran, it appears as the faculty by which the Prophet beheld God, right? In the Surah Al-Najm. Because he says, what is it, in the 9th or 10th verse of it, Ma kadhaba al-fuad ma ra'a, the heart or the blaze flux, as I translate it, has not lied regarding what it has seen. Now, as opposed to this school who leave it implied, in the Shaykhi school, fuad is actually made equivalent to being itself, the wujud, right? So when we are talking about fuad, we're definitely not talking about a physical organ. We're talking about the most inner receptacle, or for lack of a better word, the actual intelligence of the heart itself, which is a faculty of both perception and action simultaneously. So it's both a receiver and an actor. Okay, it is what animates the qalb, is the heart. Now, Idris Samawi Hamid, in the first part of his dissertation, did, I think, a good couple of pages of unpacking this concept between different concepts of what heart is, because we have different words for it in Arabic. There's suwaida, there is qalb, there is fuad, there is a few other words. But the fuad is the ultimate faculty, and it has an activity, a flux. right? So that hadith that is very central to this argument that Qaysari is making, that the believer's heart occurs between the fingers of the merciful, right? This is what the fuad is. It is both recipient and actor simultaneously, and that is because it is between the fingers, or between the oscillation of the unveiling of being and the veiling of being simultaneous, right? Both kashf and hijab that happen simultaneously. This is what where the fuad oscillates, and that is why it is equivalent to wujud itself. If that clarifies the issue a little bit more. What I'm saying, however, this is coming strictly from the very clear exposition that we find in the writings of Al-Sa'id. I argue that this perspective itself is already implied and implicit in the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi as well, even though he later kind of very overtly brings it out. So does that kind of clarify this for you?
Yeah, it does because when I think about the creator in terms of how it relates to itself, I do think about Ibn Arabi, all of the things he wrote about the Lord sort of manifesting itself to us. Yeah, I'll let somebody else go and then we can circle back to me because I've got quite a few questions.
Great.
Sidi, my first is on page 211. So it is the first comment. But before reading the paragraph, the context which I want to ask is the three levels which are present in the ayah, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, where in the previous chapter it was explained that هو, it is حقيقة الوجود لا بشرط. It is the reality of existent unconditioned.
Unconditioned. Yeah.
Then Allah, it is reality of wujud with the condition that it is everything simultaneously. And then ahad, again, it is the reality of existence, but without with condition that nothing else
That
is.
that's a different ahadiyya. There's two ahads here. There's the unconditioned ahad, and then there is the concept that Qaysari and his teacher first introduced as a term, that is ahadiyatul jam. The ahadiyatul jam is not the exclusive oneness. The ahadiyatul jam is what we can talk about in terms of God and all of these various maratib, these stations and levels, right? Together as a singular thing. That is the ahadiyatul jam. So here, this is what he's talking about. He's not talking about the the wujud al-itlaq la bi-shart maqsami. He's not talking about that. He's not talking about the totally unconditioned reality. He's talking about the conditioned reality in relation to everything, all of the names, all of the attributes, everything.
The Arabic word, it was, if I remember, بشرط بشرط لا.
Yeah,
The first one هو لا بشرط ضاحت opposite بشرط لا.
yeah.
And here it is making in this page this three level of divine, which level of the human soul represent. He's saying, if you know this, then know that the degree of the spirit,
Yep.
the Arabic the word
The
ruh,
ruhiyya, yeah.
yes, is the shadow of the degree of singularity, again, the Arabic ahadiyya.
Mm,
So this is the first representation. Then, and the degree of the heart,
mm,
again, qalb, is the shadow of the degree of unity. Again, it is the ilahiyya.
mm.
Now, my first question here, then if we are making this representation, then the level of huwiyya, What would be the representation of level of Huwiya
It would be the
related to
level of
the
wujud itself. What he's doing here, so let's go back to some of Korban's terminology, which is actually helpful in this. Zil, the shadow, right, is the instantiation of the principle. So that means that the principle is the theurge and the shadow is the theurgy. Okay? So what he's saying here is that the martaba, the degree of the spirit, the rank of the spirit, right, acts as the efficient cause or the effect of what is casting its shadow. So it's the martaba. He's saying the martaba ahadiyya, and the qalb is associating with the wahidiyya. Remember, the wahidiyya is the level of which all the names and attributes first emerge. So if we were to take one leap above that, we would say that the martabat al-fu'ad would be congruous to the martabat al-huwiyya on that level, right? So that would be then the fu'ad would be the zil, right, over the huwiyya itself. And this is quite in keeping with the second proposition of Ahsai's Fawaid al-Hikmiyya, where he says that, being looks to its Lord and essence looks to itself. So with Ahsai, being, wujud itself is a zil. It's a shadow. It's a theurgy of the theurgy, which is the Dhat al-Huwiyya itself, the essence of the Ibsaid.
Okay, I now understand how it is related to the previous question of Riaz.
Yeah.
This remark to Sheikh Ahsai, it clarifies it very well.
Yeah. He'd be rolling in his grave right now because we're using his categories to talk about the Akbarian metaphysics, which he claimed he was against, but basically re-articulated in his own way. Yeah.
Okay. The next one, it is in page 219, the second paragraph.
Mm.
Again, I want to rephrase it in my own words. When it is speaking, here the Sheikh is speaking of two groups of people which potentially could reject the Qiyamah. The first group of people is the people who have only intellectual apprehension of death realities, but without inner experience.
Mm.
And the second group is those who have with intellects, which are constrained by the fetters of habitual thinking.
Mm.
So these two groups of people are potential, let's say, in the danger of rejection of coming of Qiyamah. And he is explaining that their guilt somehow it is that they have weak faith in the prophets. But again, here in the context, what I understand, that they have weak faith of the Gnostics, which are, how to say, accessible to them. They know some people about which they have certainty that they have access to their realities, but when they are talking back to them and explaining what is going to be, they are just rejecting them by
It's even,
these two reasons.
yes, it's even more obvious than that. What he's implying is that the lack of faith of the common masses in the Awliya and the Gnostics and the Urafa is actually a weak faith in the prophets and their successors as well. Why? Because the Urafa and the Awliya of the Tariqah see themselves as the successors of the Awsiya al-Nabi and all of the prophets. So the prophet, the implied argument is that you people don't believe us because you don't really believe in the prophets. We're saying the same thing that all the prophets are saying. So we're using different terminology, you know. Um, so because you don't believe in us, you don't believe in the prophets either, right? It's just a conventional belief. Your belief in your faith is not iman, it's aqidah, pure and simple. It's a social construction. It has no genuine validity, whether from um, even from a rational perspective, it has no validity. But then there are the rationalists, the philosophers, the theologians, etc., who have no faith in the Gnostics because their faith in the prophets is questionable. They're trying to rationalize the contents of the visions of the prophets according to their understanding. They're trying to bring the prophets down to their level of understanding, not succeeding. And so what he's saying is that creates then an implied doubt, even by these theologians or exoteric religionists, in the experiences of the prophets.
Exactly. That was one of the, how say, my question or my points, because even they understand it intellectually very well, just because the lack of their experience, they are in danger.
True.
Uh, so my question would be both of this group. The first group with good intellectual apprehension, but without experience, and the second group with the weak intellects who are not even able to comprehend it. What would be the cure for these two groups?
Well, both of them, their cure would be the suluk, a proper approach to the wayfaring towards God, whether you're a mutakallim or one of the awamun nas, one of the common people. But this would require them to relinquish certain things about the worldview, right? For the theologian or the exoteric religionist, that would mean that they would have to abandon their entire categories of thinking about religion, which means that they would have to cease thinking about religion at all in the terms that they have thought about it. And that's confronting. Why? Because to them, they are in such a straitjacket about their way of thinking that anything that either contradicts or proceeds outside of the parameters of their specific way of thinking about religion is heresy to them. Okay. But yet they still, even with that, they cannot adequately explain whether to the outside world, let alone to themselves, what it is. Mahia. What is it? This thing that you call religion, God, prophet, revelation, what is it? Don't give me an intellectual answer. What is it? You theologians, you mutakallimun, your kalam cannot understand this, let alone answer it. You just regurgitate formulas that you take as axioms without even properly breaking down these axioms and really grasping and tasting these axioms yourselves, unless you're Sufis. And that's a different story. But that's what he's saying.
Okay. And last one, it is the next page, 221. It is just one row, the first row from the last passages, which sounds, it is paradox in the good sense of the word. He is talking about expressing these truths, trying to put them in words. The truth is that expressing it without tasting it, it is a veil, and disclosing it without finding it is obscurity.
Mm.
But the more you are trying to put it and explain in words, it makes it even more obscure and
This is amongst the reasons why I flipped the Heideggerian aphorism about language being the house of being on its head for precisely these sorts of reasons, because it's a nonsensical proposition. Because yeah, the haqiqah cannot be delineating the reality cannot be exhausted. And if it cannot be exhausted, it cannot be defined by the terms of philosophy, especially Aristotelians, who claim that when we define something, we're defining all elements of it, right? Which is a fallacy, even by its own standards. So it cannot be defined. And if it cannot be defined, it cannot be comprehensively known. So then the conventional religionist says, well, if we cannot know it comprehensively, then what is the point of what we're doing? And that is what propels the kind of questions that Al-Ghazali was propelled into in his Mughith min al-Dalal, when he had his crisis of faith. Because if you cannot really define it, and everything that you're defining is existing within the contextual parameters of a form of languaging about it, then at some point you may come to the conclusion that my languaging about it is a form of illusion. It's a veil. It's just it's just a socially constructed consensus about what it is, but it is not what it is. And then you try to move into the next level to define what it is. And the more you define it, the less you're defining it, because for every term that you define, there's more terms to define. And so this goes on infinitely. Ibn Arabi puts his fingers on this in one of the chapters of the fusus, is that al-haq is you cannot define it. There's no mahdud. There's no had. So if there's no had, there's no mahdud. And so whatever you define God by, it itself is already defined by God. Or, it's already contained.
Uh, that's when we are trying to put in a philosophical definition, especially the Aristotelian type. In difference with at least my experience when it comes to the symbolic language, which is kind of a door which opens to the space of the imaginal space, mundus imaginalis.
That is something else. I agree with that. That is something completely else. If language can act as the indicator of opening doors to the haqiqa, that's one thing. But the language that is indicating to the door is not the definition of the door, let alone what is behind the door. Right? So this is what he's kind of in a very roundabout way trying to say. That's a different thing. The problem with the Aristotelians, at least the Aristotelians of Islam, is that strict ones, that is. The strict Aristotelians of Islam believe that the language about the door itself and what lies beyond the door are encapsulated in the definition of it. So if you can't define it, then there's no door, there's no indication, there's none. But if you define it, then yes. And that definition is then, the essence, the mahia of what is behind the door.
Okay, thank you very much, Sidi.
Yeah. Jose?
This is more of a comment, I guess. I spent a couple of days recently reading Sayyid Hassan Nasr's chapter on the Ikhwan al-Safa, and their whole cosmology and everything.
This is from his Islamic Cosmological Doctrines book, his dissertation.
Yeah, it's that book. I don't know if that's
the Introduction to Islamic Cosmological Doctrines.
Yeah. Just to get just to broaden my horizons a bit. But reading through it, what occurred to me is that it actually helps explain the cosmology in Qaysari, like point by point.
Yes. It does.
Whereas, so sometimes when I read Ibn Arabi and he throws all these terms like nature and prime matter and prime substance and universal body. And like, I don't really know what they're referring to, but this chapter on the Ikhwan al-Safa clarifies it really nicely. And the one point that really stands out to me is the description of tabi'a, universal nature, which I've always had a hard time grasping. But if for the Ikhwan al-Safa, it seems that nature is it's a faculty of the soul. It's the soul insofar as it's imprinted on matter or on the body and the celestial bodies and moving them. And
which, according
so
to
that,
them, is also in a kind of a roundabout way. They say this in the Rasail, that what you just said, and that haraka is what then initiates the dualism in things. And even Arabi echoes that later on.
right. Interesting. So that helps me make sense of what nature is. It really is the soul. It's the soul considered with respect to its being imprinted. And then the word imprinted is the same root as the word nature. So that helps too. Nature is a kind of imprint of something on something else, and in this case the soul on
the
body.
Yeah, the taba of something to imprint it is, that's
And then so that was to me the most clarifying. And then also the relation between prime matter, universal body, and the body of the great world. I'm looking back at an earlier chapter in Qaysari. This is on page 187, where he's giving it's connected to today's chapter because he's giving the parallels between the macrocosm and the microcosm. And so Nasser really explains really well how you get from prime matter, which is like a spiritual principle, down to the absolute body, and then down to, I guess, the determined body. These are the same levels that he gives here. So it just really clarified that for me. And it's also interesting to now apply that to the microcosm, where the heart is what corresponds to the soul, and the animal soul is what corresponds to nature. So that could help us think about the relation between those in this chapter, that the animal soul is sort of maybe a faculty of the heart. It's the way that the heart governs the body.
Yeah.
And the heart would also be it would correspond to the guarded tablet, right? So the intellect being the pen, the heart receiving its emanations, and then turning towards the body through the soul to govern the body. That was really it. It was just, but I wanted to also mention that it raises the question of the influence of the Ikhwan al-Safa upon Ibn Arabi.
big time. That's a big question. It's a very thorny question. It's been debated. The purists try to minimize it. I believe it's very profound. Just remember, one of the good things these people did was to conceal their identities, although it was generally understood that they were probably Ismailis. But the Rasail went everywhere. In fact, you can argue that the Rasail had more influence in the world of Islam than even Avicenna, even though, that entire Andalusian tradition that Ibn Arabi comes from, with some of his predecessors, like Ibn Masara, they were taking Avicenna seriously, but they were taking the Pythagoreanism and Neo-Pythagoreanism of the Ikhwan al-Safa far more serious. You see this in Ibn Arabi's immediate predecessors, and to a great extent in Ibn Arabi himself. So a lot of these Ismaili Shia ideas are very much filtered through the lens of the Rasail Ikhwan and Safa with Ibn Arabi himself. So I would say that it is very central that, despite what some of contemporary scholars have held, when you read the Rasail Ikhwan and Safa and then go back and read Ibn Arabi, you begin to see that what Ibn Arabi is doing is basically recrafting much of both the terminology and the definitions of the Ikhwan Safa in his own way, right? So he had obviously read these at a probably very early age, studied them, because to have that kind of theosophical approach that Ibn Arabi did, even with some of the contemporaries in Andalusia, what Ibn Arabi accomplishes, in my opinion, is a fusion between the perspective of the Rasail Ikhwan and Safa and the Sufism of Andalusia. He does mention, I think once or twice here and there, he does mention them. But in essence, he didn't really even have to mention them at all. It's obvious that this is what's happening. Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And yeah, it brings in the Pythagorean hermetic alchemical because that's all being filtered through the Ikhwan
all of
Safa.
those topics that he covers in his Futuhat al-Makkiyah, every last one.
There's one when we talk about this, something comes to mind that we talk about the influences on Ibn Arabi. It was some article someone sent me a couple of years ago that I read that I think was on Ibn Arabi and Ghazali. I think it was comparing them, and I got the impression from that article that Ibn Arabi read nothing before his big futuh that he had when he was 16. And there was this whole thing about, there's some quote about it's much easier to write on a tablet that's never been written upon than one that's been written upon and erased. And Ghazali had this regret that he had actually learned theology and philosophy before Sufism, but Ibn Arabi was just pure because he didn't read anything. I don't know if that's true, but I just had that impression ever since I read that.
There's a couple of fallacies in that perspective. Number one, at least where Al-Ghazali is concerned, Al-Ghazali composes his Ihya Ulumuddin after all of this. So he didn't compose his Ihya before his crisis of faith. He did it after his crisis of faith. So he came back to all of this stuff because it was also important to clarify a lot of the issues. And that book became one of the most influential texts of theology and just Aqidah in general in Islam ever since, still being read. So with Ibn Arabi, there's a few things going on. At that stage in Andalusia, you have to understand that the Sufis particularly had were quite an important estate in the Andalusian society. Right? They had become a political force in their own right, but because of their proximity to the Christians in Europe, and also because of just internal stuff within, North African Muslim society of that time and Andalusian society, the Sufis were not your average they were not fundamentalists. So they were steeping themselves into intellectual discourse from wherever it came. And that is why, even before Ibn Arabi, they were producing some very interesting intellectual powerhouses within their own right. So true that there was a level of in the discourse, as you find elsewhere in the Sufi milieu, there's a level of anti-intellectualism. But I would argue that the anti-intellectualism is more a polemical device against these rival schools, rather than being a form of practice. because we know that Ibn Arabi, almost very shortly after his first initial experience, was not only steeping himself in Quran, but in Hadith under the tutelage of people who were teaching the science of Hadith. So in these teaching exercises, and these masters were all had Sufi affiliations of their own, and so in that circle, he would have come across Al-Ghazali. Very swiftly, he was mastering the ideas of all the various theological schools. So he was steeping himself in the Ash'ari theology quite deeply, and by the same token, in their rivals, the Mu'tazila. He knew what each of them were saying. So he was engaging in a deep, systematic study of theological text as he was studying the science of Hadith and Tafsir and all of this stuff, right? So it wasn't the case that he was merely sitting at the foot of masters and just, absorbing whatever they said from the pulpit or from the diets. He was also engaging in systematic study. And the works that he's left us before he even came to the East, show this very, very conspicuously, the categories by which he's arguing things. It's not rationalist, but the terminology that he comes up with, whether we're talking, especially when we're talking about this book of the Fabulous Griffon, Kitab Angab Mukri, which is a very interesting piece of, Sufi literature in its own right, and amongst the corpus of Ibn Arabi. So, in that circle and within these Sufis of North Africa and Andalusia, he would have come across Ibn Masara. Once he came across Ibn Masara and he mentioned him, he would have almost immediately come across the Ikhwan al-Safa. And Ibn Arabi had a very precocious intellect. And if he wasn't someone to just simply dismiss without first knowing what it is that he was going to dismiss. So he would go and steep himself in study and read as much as he could. And only then, after he had learned the content, would he then criticize. All of this is also going on while he's having very deep visionary experiences and going through his various ascetic practices and all the rest. So this was quite an involved, sophisticated ethos.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that it would be more of a kind of polemic move than something to be taken literally. I think part of the claim in that.
Well, just think about it. If they had been any other way, just within that society, wherever it was in the Islamic world, they would have been swallowed up by their rivals. Just remember, it was usually a lot of these Sufis that managed to impress these princes and potentates. And it wasn't just by mere personal charisma. The charisma also came with an intellectual arts behind it. Otherwise, how in the world would they be able to convince, these potentates? So Suhrawardi is a great example of this. He was a wandering itinerant, dressed like a dervish, hung out with Sufis, yet he managed to impress these Seljuk rulers. And then when he came to Aleppo initially with Malik Zahir Shah as well. Right. So the charisma and the learning were hand in hand.
I think part of the the claim in that article was, and I think it was quoting Ibn Arabi himself or something that was supposed to be attributed to him, that he received all of the intellectual sciences directly also. That was the explanation for why he didn't have to study anything. But I always found that to be sort of inexplicable, how you could learn through revelation all of these details. I mean, I guess it's possible.
I could unpack that. It's like the claim about the ummi nature of the Prophet himself, yet the Prophet ran a successful commercial enterprise for over a decade and a half on behalf of his wife, Khadija, between Antioch and Mecca. If he couldn't count or read, then how was he running a business? You can't counter read. How do you organize your merchandise or other agents, or how do you do any of that through revelation? But that in that period, there's no revelation yet for the prophet, at least not publicly. So ummi must mean something else, right?
Yeah, yeah.
In the world of double truth, and even within amongst the Sufis, you get this quite a lot. You will often find these sorts of statements that actually mean something else than what they're saying. And Ibn Arabi was the master, master of this. Because if he admitted that he had, like, say, studied the Ikhwan al-Safa, then the rivals, these fuqaha, would have taken something like this against him. But if he makes the claim that, well, I received all of this through revelation, but without explaining further what this actually means, because you can sit and read a book and receive revelation as these ideas are coming to you, right? A book can be closed to certain people, but then it can open itself to certain people. Some people are reading the same text, right? It opens itself, its ideas to you, while other people struggle to understand what it means and don't get anywhere. That is, what Ibn Arabi is talking about here is also a modality of revelation, without obviating the fact that he actually studied. Right? And one of the Quranic ayat that Ibn Arabi constantly quotes is Rabbi Zadni ilma. Oh Lord, increase me in knowledge. So, and in the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi, everything in existence is a vehicle, a wasila to the end of knowledge. Everything.
Yeah. That's a nice nuanced argument. That's good. Makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
No worries. F? You had a question, I think, or is that for the Sohradi class yesterday?
Yeah, there was a Surowardi class yesterday and to be continued next week. But I do have a question. The very first page of chapter 10, page 203, it's the third paragraph, the last paragraph on the page. Not being an Arabic speaker, like not understanding the language, can you help me with this where it says the mind, Ru, and then with a Dhamma on the Ra? What does that mean, with a Dhamma on the Ra?
Okay, Dhamma is a vowel marker. It's the U vowel marker, right? So in Arabic, especially when you have an unvocalized text, right? The author will always, if there's a very specific pronunciation of a word or a letter, a vowel on a letter that changes the meaning of the word, the author will mention this. So this is going on. They are the mystery, the hidden, the spirit, the heart, the word, the mind, Ru, with the Dhamma on the Ra, meaning Ru. Rather than, if he didn't mention this, the Dhamma, then that word could be read anywhere. Could be read as Re, it could be read as Ra. But when he says with a Dhamma and the Ra, it means it has to be read as Ru.
Meaning mind.
One of
So,
the words.
oh, okay, all right. I mean, I knew it had to do with the pronunciation, but I didn't know exactly like what the point of making that emphasis was. So it's to distinguish the meaning mind from other possible ways it could be rendered. All right. Okay. So it's not a particular type of mind. It's just mind in general, like the general usage of the word. Okay. You know, the whole of chapter 11, obviously, the return has to do, and the resurrection has to do with, it's an eschatological doctrine, right? And it's kind of troublesome. I've noted on page 217, note 7, just the way where I mean, there's a lot of language being used there in the Quran, speaking about the end,
Hmm.
the hour. And so the hour will not occur unless the earth is shaken violently, the heaven is split apart, the planets are scattered, the stars fall, the sun is blotted out, and the moon is eclipsed. And this is beside the point. I mean, it's not a question or a comment on this work. I guess, a comment on the whole concept of eschatological doctrine in the first place,
Hmm.
because of I hate to bring it up, like present day politics and events, but what's happening in Palestine right now. To me, that whole mess is because of eschatological doctrines,
Don't
right?
remotely disagree.
Yeah, and so anyway, that's all I really wanted to say is like when you read that in a holy scripture, and especially in all its gory details, and then you realize there are people alive and have always been probably who are actually trying to manifest what they're reading in order to bring about
And like
this,
actual physical a physical apocalypse. Yeah, the thing is, I mean, okay, this sidetracking a little bit, but let me first answer the first part of your insight. With this particular perspective on religion, these are symbols. They're not literal things, right? So Mullah Sadra ibn Arabi Qaysari Sohrawardi, I mean, in Sohrawardi, you're going to see it very explicitly in what I have translated. They are not seeking a political outcome in the form of an Armageddon or eschatology, right? This, they believe, and I agree, that these sorts of political resolutions in the form of eschatology is where, things go off the rails, and where what we see in Palestine right now transpire. That these scriptural symbolism about the eschatology refer to other things. And that doesn't mean that we cannot have revolutions and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't mean the end of the world, okay? Or even an end of a world. What it means is something else, okay? These historical accelerationists, whether we're talking about Christians, Jews, or even Muslims, in a sense, are trying to push the hand of God to consummate history on their own terms. And each of them wants it on their terms. Okay? This is the insanity of all of this.
Yeah.
I think that, that the creator of all, the one that encompasses all things, is only speaking exclusively through their mouths and through their scriptures and through their words, etc. Never mind that this, in many respects, is a form of idolatry, and as we know from all three of these creeds, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, is that their exoteric version of God is an idol of their own creation. It's a God that they have fabricated. What Ibn Arabi says that God created in the face with these three, this is a classic example of what this is. And that God created in the creeds has now come to a point that has become destructive. It has, it is literally rupturing as a demon into history to fulfill a literal, a literal occurrence of these tropes. But this is the problem that this kind of approach is seeking to address. Because we have seen over and over and over and over again where this kind of short-sighted political eschatological vision leads to. When you immanentize the eschaton, you are actually, number one, displaying the fact that you don't understand the nature of being at all, right? That you are, you have no you are so veiled from yourself, let alone from being itself, that all you can do is to reduce things to political equations that benefit you and harm your political adversaries. It is like a literal reading of the book of Exodus with the children of Israel going into the Sinai and basically massacring all of the tribes and peoples in the Sinai that stand in their way, like Amalek, etc. The quote that Mr. Netanyahu quoted right at the beginning of his assault on Gaza in 2020. So that kind of thinking is very bad. So their approach to religion is coming at this from a symbolic angle. Now, because they're living in societies like the Muslim world at the time that they were living it, they have to be very careful how they express these truths, right? Today, we're not constrained. We can very openly say that a literalist, exoteric approach to scripture on the question of eschatology is bullshit. It reveals an infantile and extremely dangerous mind. That doesn't mean that we're saying, you know, people shouldn't fight for their rights, there shouldn't be political revolutions, but don't try to craft them in these religious eschatological terms. A perfect example, in my opinion, is the Islamic Revolution in Iran that, you know, deliberately manipulated the mass of the believing population of Iran using Quranic and eschatological and, you know, imami language to bring people into the street, overthrow the system, put into power a mullah who turned out to lie about everything that he said he wanted to do once he came back to power, Ayatollah Khomeini, right? So we've seen where these sorts of things lead, right? This is not an endorsement of the West. Everybody knows where I stand on the West, but it is also not an endorsement of the kind of politicization of eschatology that the Abrahamic tradition is incessantly susceptible to, because you cannot get its head around esotericism, and it wants to entrench very specific narratives, very specific institutions. It has an extremely dualistic vision of the world, and rather than seek to resolve this, it deliberately seeks to exacerbate it. And the Jews and the Jewish people in general, on a historical basis, have been the worst perpetrators of this, incessantly. Their Chosenite theology breeds this. We are the chosen, everybody else is beneath us. God has looked upon us only. Here's the proof, the land is ours. Everybody else is either our slave or whatnot. I mean, this is the epitome, the consummation of everything that is wrong with the Abrahamic tradition at its exoteric level. This is where these sorts of things lead.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I just wanted to make that point because it's what occurred to me while going through it. And I know that, you know, it's a misreading to try to politicize and exteriorize these eschatological ideas, doctrines. But yeah, isn't it weird? Like I'm like, I think the Islamic doctrine is actually the most benign of them all. Like as you said, the Jewish doctrine I think is the worst, and then
primarily
not far behind.
The Jewish doctrine this is the real hilarity of this. The Jewish eschatological doctrines want that they actually inherited from the Iranians. If you look at the Bible, you know, the Old Testament up to the point of the Babylonian captivity, and then right after the Babylonian captivity, or just right before it with the book of Daniel and everything that comes after it, there is no eschatology. The Jews had they had no concept of Messiah, no afterlife other than Sheol, which is kind of a Semitized version of the Greek concept of Hades. This is what the Jews had before that. But once they interact with the Iranians, then all these concepts of heaven, hell, you know, eschatology, Messiah starts to basically come into Judaism as well. So obviously they appropriated this entire framework of eschatology and the messianic concept from Iranians, from Zoroastrians.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrians in their time had the same problem, probably with exotericism and literal attempts to usher in the end times. And then Christians come along and they do the same thing. They appropriate ideas from Judaism, and I'm not sure who's more at fault, to be honest, with this situation in Palestine. If it's the Jewish people or the Christian people, the hardcore fundamentalists. it's probably, two sides of the same coin, but this is obviously not just a Jewish situation. It's as much a Christian situation too.
It's a Judeo. I mean, they say it themselves. It's a Judeo-Christian problem.
Yeah.
This is this false egregore of the Judeo-Christian conception of the world that ever since late antiquity has plagued the planet. And I will use that word. It has plagued the planet. Judaism and Christianity have been a plague on this planet. And in my opinion, it was Islam that really tempered this from within the Abrahamic tradition itself.
Yeah.
If you look at the history of the Near East, what the Christians did in the destruction of the architectural and literary culture of that part of the world before Islam ever came around will blow your mind. I mean, we are talking about jihadis and takfiris on a level that would shame ISIS. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, the first couple of them happened on the watch of the Byzantine Christian emperors before Umar or any Muslim ever even set foot in Egypt, right? A lot of the architectural heritage that had relatively been untouched even by the various empires that came and left before were destroyed by the Christians. I mean, even the Jews left them alone. But it was the Christians that began to deface this stuff as, figments of Satan and the heathen's way of life. A lot of Westerners who get into this clash of civilization rhetoric don't like to hear about this history. But Christianity has been a far more destructive force in the world, and beginning as of the late, antique period, than Islam has ever been or ever will be. It completely destroyed the heritage. What we have today of the heritage of the Near East and what we know, of whether ancient Mesopotamia or the Assyrians, Babylonians, and the various Chaldean civilizations that came to Hittites, etc., is only a fraction of what we could have known had these Christians not put their hands on it. Luckily, in Egypt, the sands of the desert buried a lot of the treasures of ancient Egypt, but whatever the Christians got their hands on, they destroyed. It wasn't the Muslims. This is all documented history. And I defy any one of these YouTubers, these fundamentalist Christian YouTubers who are under Islamophobic rule, to prove otherwise. I will bring scholarship after scholarship produced from Western universities itself with documented evidence that shows that this happened.
Yeah, I believe it. So that's great. Thank you. I just wanted to talk about that for a moment, just because it's a real time manifestation of some of the scripture gone completely crazy, like you said before, insane. Really, it's insanity.
Yeah.
And yet, obviously, that's not what the prophet had in mind, and the prophets.
And with Judaism and Christianity, you can make the argument that they try to fix it with the mysticism, which is fair enough. I mean, in the case of Judaism, it's quite transparent and porous because the Kabbalah only shows up around the 10th, 11th centuries, and it comes out of the Islamic world in Baghdad, in particular, and it is so obviously a Islamic Aristotelian Neoplatonic cosmology superimposed on a Jewish one, that I don't know what to say. Most scholars who have looked at this material with any depth have come to the exact same conclusion. Same with Christian mysticism.
Excuse me. So if there's one of your weird ironies there, because I mean, the doctrine wouldn't be complete without the eschatological part of it, obviously. So I mean, that's an essential component of it, and yet, the insanity that ensues from it. So it's just funny or ironic. I don't know if you would.
I mean,
It's not funny. It's definitely not funny.
I mean, the Indo-Aryan religions have these eschatological visions as well, but theirs is more complex, nuanced, and layered. whether from the Zoroastrian angle or even the Hindu, the various Hindu schools, have some notion of that. But what is interesting about the East is that, especially as we get into ideas like the Vedanta or Taoism, etc., these vision of end times just fall by the wayside. They become so silly and irrelevant that you may as well have them or not have them. It makes no difference to the actual doctrine that these schools are espousing, particularly Taoism.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for entertaining those ideas. I
Sure.
appreciate that.
No worries.
I also wanted to mention just the last thing. I noticed I really enjoyed the very final paragraph of chapter 11 on page 223.
Mhm.
I'm not reading it here, but basically the idea, I can barely see my screen here. Well, the footnote to the last paragraph, note 20, it cites is Ibn Arabi's ontology pantheistic.
Mm.
And for some reason, I just wanted to make a mention of that too, because I noticed that a lot of these new age people online, like your spiritual entrepreneurs and whatnot, they seem to want to equate the universe with God and make, just the, make the whole situation a pantheistic situation.
Yeah, but without nuance. I mean, we can say the universe is God,
Definitely.
but we can say the universe is not God. They don't like the dialectic that, for example, Ibn Arabi put between he, not he. That constant oscillation between it is and isn't, it isn't and isn't, where both modalities are true at the same time. They don't like that kind of nuance.
No, they want to get rid. They want. It seems like the concept of God they're trying to get rid of it by just making it
Yes,
equivalent to the
the
universe. So
universe.
so that you just have basically immanentism
Yeah, yeah,
without the transcendentalism
yeah,
and without the nuance, therefore,
yeah.
so that they can just do away with the word God and just use universe. And
And then
I
once
don't
they're
know
tired of that, then it kind of descends into this, kind of solipsistic humanism, which is
exactly,
what the
exactly.
elite, it's the ideology of the elite.
Exactly, because every one of them, these new age entrepreneurs, think that they are the universe.
Yeah.
Like,
Peter Thiel is a great example of this. Yeah.
yeah,
I hate Peter Thiel.
Amen to that.
Worst.
Amen.
I can't even.
It's one of them anyway. It's this guy. Yeah. Hey, Mary.
Worst guy in the world. I, I think all this about eschatology is really interesting. All these calamities on the last day, to me, they've always been metaphors for what happens when you die.
Yes.
The world falls apart. So when we're talking about like trying to like from an accelerationist point of view, trying to bring about the last day, we're just kind of talking about warmongering,
Yes.
which is where the Zionism comes in.
Yep.
I was thinking a lot about Jewish eschatology throughout this conversation. I was thinking about how a lot of it is basically about a return to and a restoration of some imagined or real, but imagined Holy Land,
Mm.
and how that's kind of very that would very easily glom onto the sort of fascist, like return to tradition type of talking point as well. You have this imagined great society of the past that's constantly under threat. I mean, obviously anti-Semitism exists, right? But like it's not the same as anti-Zionism. And
Well, I mean,
I think that Jewish eschatology leans Zionist, don't you
yeah.
think? Like,
but you look at the Old Testament itself, after these Israelites came out of the Sinai, they were constantly at war with all the locals. This is just based on the narrative of the Bible. Once they established their kingdoms after a few generations split into two, that of Judea and Israel, right?
right.
Judah
And that's where it gets exciting.
That's when it gets excited. They weakened themselves. Not everybody was a monotheist between these two kingdoms. right? Obviously, the career of the two prophets, Elijah and Elisha, based on the text of the Old Testament, tells us that very
This is
explicitly.
the kind of the last era of Asherah
Yeah.
worship, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And then all of a sudden the Assyrians come and destroy everything and take these people captive. Once the Assyrians fall and the Babylonians kind of inherit the Assyrian Empire, these Israelites and Jews become the inheritance of the Babylonians until the Persians come along and free them and send them back to rebuild their temple. But already we see in the narrative of the Old Testament itself that there wasn't an idyllic age. It's in fact all the problems, the real problems, continued after the Exodus.
Right. There's like a refusal to reckon socially with cultural history at play. I thought that what you said about eschatology falling by the wayside a little bit in Taoism was interesting because that's kind of true. And I think that it might be because eschatology is indicative of a very socially engaged tradition, of one that is engaged with social strife in some form or another.
100%, yes.
And Taoism
it's
takes a
weird.
very broad perspective on society, frankly.
Whereas the early Taoists were shamans.
Right. Recluses, wanderers.
Yeah.
Oh, and then the last thing was the reason for all this eschatological imagery here is that, from a sort of perspective of the names, is it's like the primordial shattering of the vessels. It's kind of reckoning the names against one another is here what the last day is supposed to mean. It's about the names falling into concord, kind of like sifting materials in a pan or something like that.
It's
That
just
was my read on it.
and just how I've been trying to read this whole conflict in Palestine over the last 2 years. What are the divine names doing here? What are they trying to balance out? And we're starting to get a glimpse of what that is actually about, I think.
I just wish less people were dying.
But it's pretty obvious that
wish Zionism didn't exist.
well, I think this is what the divine names are kind of moving things towards.
Rooting that out.
Yeah.
That's the hope, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I remember enough about the conversation from 30 minutes ago, but I thought what Hussein said about nature and the universal soul and the inscribed tablet, connecting all those together with, animal intellects was all really interesting stuff. And it just kind of gets the brain going.
That's actually a good book. The book you referenced by Sayyid Hussein Nas, Introduction to Islamic Cosmological Doctrine. You can find versions of this on Anna's archive too. It's a classic. It is a good book. It was his PhD dissertation at MIT back in the 50s, early 50s. I mean, there's a lot of stuff with Nas subsequently I disagree with, but that book it stands on its own merits, and it's a very, very good piece of literature that people
Maybe I'll look into it.
Yeah. Introduction to Islamic Cosmology, and the Ikhwan al-Safa, the Brethren of Purity of Basra, how they are very important to all of this. Just encyclopedias of
I saw the Brothers of Purity referenced in a footnote, actually, as it came up.
They're very important. I think that the translation of their Rasail is actually complete. So you can probably find all of that online as well. It's pretty encyclopedic. They cover everything pretty much.
Yeah, maybe I could find both on Anna's archive.
Yeah. If you stumble, let me know. I'll try to locate this stuff.
Okay, thank you very much.
No worries. No worries at all. Any parting thoughts by anyone, Hassan?
As a last sentence, in the light of what was said by Jeff and this exoteric misunderstanding of eschatology, so compared to the monotheist fundamentalist, to call oneself pagan, it is not pejorative, but an honor and proud.
Except if you've read any of Algi's Uzdavini's studies, he has a real problem with this term pagan. He thinks that that is a slur. I don't disagree with what he's saying. I just think because we have the term, we have the Aristotelian in me still wants to actually use the term more from a definitional basis. But yeah, that is very much the case. And this is the tension. And it's a tension that is beautifully resolved in a figure like Suhrawadi, as you will see when I put these Waradat Matakli Sad in front of you, because his is a form of pagan Abrahamic monotheism on steroids. How he resolved these things is beautiful. It's just, it's like a tapestry. I mean, there are elements of his ontology that bother me, but otherwise, I mean, the Sheikh al-Ishraq was truly something else. Truly something else. And yeah, I mean, this stuff leads back to some very primordial understandings about the nature of spirit. Things that the ancestors, before the monotheistic religions, that before the Abrahamic traditions plagued our planet with their presence, they already knew, and they never left. They never left. The Hermeticism and how it, carried over into all three of these traditions and influenced greatly development of mysticism shows you the extent to which, the ancient Egyptian, conception of the universe persisted, because that is essentially what Hermeticism is. It's, a Hellenized version of the ancient Egyptian ethos, religious ethos. So we owe those people a lot. And in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging these people at all. And obviously their ideas have been refined through the time. That will happen, but we, to dismiss them as these exoteric Abrahamic traditions to just like that they're pagans reveals more the Jahiliyyah, in my opinion, of these people. Yeah. Because that pagan ethos is not just about bowing to idols. It's not about that. There's a lot more behind it.
This will open the Pandora box with a whole series of further questions, but the Hermeticism, which you speak about, some speculation that it is the Sabaeans mentioned in the Quran, that they are confirmed as
As Ahlul Kitab,
genuine
people of the
and
book.
truth tradition, which
Yes.
is accepted by us.
Yes. Something the Jews and Christians didn't do, but then quietly appropriated. But with Islam, at least overtly, if we identify these Sabians as being Hermeticists, followers of Hermes, then yes, yeah, Islam did this, and the other two didn't. Okay, folks, that's all for today. Let's leave it here for today. And obviously, we'll come back next week on Saturday with Sohrawardi. I will strive to get this translation of Qurban properly formatted and to you if you need it for the Sohrawardi class sometime during the week, inshallah. Otherwise, until next week, everybody be well. Ya Haq.